So I realized I might get a question about what to do if you've left your starter in the fridge for a while, forgotten about it, kind of haven't made sourdough bread in a while, and it gets old. So this is about how to revive a sourdough starter. So this is a starter. It's been in my fridge for a while, and I've been ignoring it for the past couple weeks, mostly because I haven't had much in the way of flour. So this actually looks pretty normal because I already stirred it, but if you've got a sourdough starter that's just been hanging out in the fridge, you will see it start to separate. The top of the starter might start to turn a little bit grayish, and then there'll be a slightly grayish liquid that sits on top of it. It hasn't gone bad, it's just got a different set of microbes predominating because there's less sugar for the yeast to feed on. So what we want to do is we want to get some sugar back in that starter and some starch for the yeast to feed on, and that'll help the yeast get back going again. So the first thing you want to do is you want to stir that liquid back into the starter, just get it all incorporated again. Looks like this. And I had a good bit of starter in there. I don't know if you can see exactly how full my jar is. Maybe about that full. So I just poured a little bit of that into this jar. And I've added some fresh flour, just like normal if I'm feeding my sourdough starter. And I'm going to pour in some water, again, just like normal. Hard to hold the phone and do this. There you go. So we're going to give that a stir, and we'll see how it looks. And then when I'm bringing a starter back to life like this, I like to add just a tiny bit of honey, maybe like, for this amount of starter, I'd maybe add half a teaspoon of honey, but I'm just going to eyeball it. And that gives that yeast just a little bit of sugar to jumpstart it and get it back going. You can revive a starter just by being patient and adding flour and water every 4 hours or so, or 3 or 4 times a day. But it will take longer. It'll get back going and happy by this evening. This is morning, and it'll be happy by this evening if I add some honey this morning. And the other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned is, so this extra starter that's kind of gone old and I'm not going to use, and then any extra starter that comes from like feeding this one on repeat all day, I'm just going to collect it all in this jar, and I'm going to use it to make sourdough pancakes. And those aren't pancakes that are like risen by the sourdough. You still use baking powder, baking soda to rise the pancakes, but you can pour your extra sourdough starter in them, and it gives them this really nice, tangy, sourdough-like flavor. So that's a good way to use up extra starter. So I'm just going to stir this in, and then I'll show you about how much honey I add. Alright, now I've got my batch of reviving starter at a pretty good consistency. Let's see if I can look in here. See how it's stirrable, but it's still got some body to it. And I'm going to add a little bit of honey now. We'll see if I can show how much honey I'm going to add in here. Let's bring it right above that. And then pat my head and rub my tummy. See if I'm coordinating enough. Whoop. Okay, that's pretty good. And I didn't drip honey all over. Fantastic. Okay. So yeah, just a little bit of honey, and I'll stir that in there. Again, that's probably about a half teaspoon or so. And we'll check in with this throughout the day and watch it slowly starting to get bubbly and happy again. And I'm just going to leave this at room temperature, just like you would if you were, beginning a starter, or if you were making lots of bread and you wanted your starter to be really active. It's just going to stay at room temperature, lightly covered. Alright, it is now about 2 in the afternoon. I started rejuvenating my starter, I don't know, around 7 o'clock this morning. And once I mixed the flour and water and a little bit of honey into it, I just let it sit at room temperature, just kind of with the lid not all the way screwed on like that. And you can see we're now at the point where you can see some little tiny bubbles forming. So that's our first really good sign that it's starting to become active. It still smells like a not very active starter, which means it smells more like acetone than it does like yeast. But that's going to start to change. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pour half of this off into my old starter container where I hold all my old inactive starter that I'm just going to use to make pancakes or whatever. And then, so I'll pour half of this off into that container, and then I will add some more flour and water to what's left in this jar. And the reason I'm pouring half of this off is just so I don't end up with a massive amount of starter once I've got it up and going again. Because you want to, I've probably mentioned this in another video, but you want to add about the same amount of flour and water as the amount of starter you've already got in there. So you want to kind of double the volume. And obviously that gets really big really fast if you don't take off half before you do a feeding. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to show you what it looks like. So it is 9:30 p.m. and this is the starter that I took out of the fridge this morning that was all sad and kind of smelly. And it perked right up with just a few feedings and hanging out at room temperature. It's back in its original container with its proper name. This is Beeble. And yeah, I'm about to make a loaf of bread with it. And I'll bake that off tomorrow morning.